So much of this, for the average person, I think, and that's who the show is designed to speak to, it's around ideology. You know, some people feel, well, if I elect a centrist or a left-leaning government, they'll do more in the way of social programs. And if I elect more of a right to center or right-wing government, they'll do more in the area of business or economy or things like that. And at the end of the day, though, it doesn't work either way, right? If you go way to the left and you start doing all of these things, but then you don't have productivity in your cities and in your communities and in your country, you can't afford the programs anyway. And there might not be the jobs and other things that need to be there. But if you go more to the right, which is part of what we're seeing now provincially in Ontario, and not just in Ontario, but there's this belief, no, we got to focus on the economy. This is the way it is. We're going to have to cut this. And then, you know, I've met with the Chamber of Commerce in London. I mean, one of their primary concerns is homelessness. Because, you know, the homeless people are out in front of their businesses, or they're watching what's happening on Richmond Street or downtown, right? And they can't do business because these social problems have not been dealt with. So you end up with these interesting alliances, such as the food bank in Circles, or the food bank and the Chamber of Commerce, or Business Cares. Everybody trying to be creative, but I have found that people who are like that, people like you, Jessica, or people like me, we're not so much ideological that way. We are trying to figure out solutions as to how a person can move forward. And we realize it's going to take both. It's going to take productivity, and it's going to take a focusing on the people that are having trouble escaping poverty. And one of the things that I've been telling people lately is Feed Ontario, which is all of Ontario's food banks, just finished doing a study that showed that 60% of all the people that come to food banks in Ontario have said that they would be homeless if it wasn't for a food bank. So you're talking about homelessness and you're talking about housing. And the answer to that, to keep a person in the place, is not a food bank, right? Like it's just not. It's their ability to have the funds necessary to be able to navigate a modern, complex society. So I really agree with what you're saying there, but I do worry about the political ideologies that average people fall into that trap and think it's got to be one way or the other, where it's really smart thinking and good programming and good policies that could help us get out of this. Do you have a thought on that?
Agreed. Yes, I do agree. And I think ultimately what you have to do when you're looking at voting in new individuals, or when you're looking at policies, even as a business, even as an individual who goes to their neighborhood association and how to support individuals in your neighborhood, you have to look at specific issues. So we always say one of the solutions to potentially solving poverty is to look at, you know, what people's platforms, when we're talking about voting, look at people's platforms through the lens of certain issues and not just certain parties, because yes, we do need good policy. We need, politicians who are advocating for change, for those MPs that are going to stand up and tell people stories. I think, but ultimately, it takes a coordinated approach, because people do want to work. They do want to contribute to society. They do want to, buy from small businesses. But it takes systems, and it takes supports, and it takes politicians to be able to set our community up for success in that regard.
Yeah, and we try to tell the city politicians this all the time, that the average number of visits that a person makes to the food bank is 3 in a year. 3, right? It's not what people are thinking, that they're breaking down the doors and coming in. It's true that the demand has been really great, but a lot of them are now people like seniors, a 10% rise in seniors, a 20% rise in people that are working. Right. So as you look at those things, you realize it's all these new people that are coming into the system. It's not so much the old ones just, coming 12 times a year because they can. So I really agree with you on that, about the fact that people, we meet with them, we talk with them, they They want an apartment. They want to be able to work. They need training. A single mom wants to be able to find some daycare so that she can go out and do what she needs to. But the longer and longer that it takes us to deal with it as a society, the more impossible it becomes to actually find the solutions, because it's just crowded all over with all this webbing of intra-jurisdictional stuff between governments and maybe also between agencies and other things in the city. So when you finally find a will to maybe do something, it's such a web of complexity that it's hard to do that. I'm sure that for you, you've been at this 12 years or so, I think you said, but in that 12 years, it must have become much more complex.
Because I do see, changes in government that changes systems, and also, changes in education. We saw a lot of change in our society of like the dichotomy of us versus them in some ways, kind of starting right before the pandemic. And it almost feels like we live in a very individualistic society right now, where a lot of people really want to look out for themselves, because I don't blame anyone for doing so, because things have risen. Just as you mentioned, people who are working are accessing the food bank, because the cost of food and the cost of living has just greatly increased, and people are definitely paycheck to paycheck lately. So what you're saying around people who are kind of like the typical people who might have accessed resources, or seeing the amount of people who have accessing some of our resources, just like the food bank, have greatly increased. So the complexities have increased. So, there's a 10% of people or seniors now accessing the food bank. That also means that those seniors are struggling so much that our healthcare system might not be able to, there's an impact to the healthcare system. There's an impact to mental health care system. It just like you said, it's all interconnected.
Yeah. I grew up in Calgary, but, it was definitely true that out west during when I was growing up, there was this feeling that if you vote Liberal, you're a bit to the left, and if you vote Conservatives, you're a bit to the right. But the truth of the matter was, both of those parties were busy building Canada. Right? They were building universities, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the CN Rail, the Auto Pact, right? Hospitals, research centers, right? So, yes, there might be a bit of nuance of difference as to how they went about it, but they knew they were building a country. And so they built on one another. If there was an election, they didn't just kind of do away with it and swing over and go in another direction. They knew they were doing it. What's happening to our politics now is there's really a lot of mudslinging going on, but also an ideology that the moment if I can just get elected and get into power, I'm going to distinguish myself from the people that came before me and move in a total different direction. And we see that in the United States and elsewhere as well. But for the service providers, which is what I'm trying to get here about you, Jessica, it's a nightmare, right? It's just so hard because people need a system that they can count on. And if that system is no longer consistent, that is tough. If the federal government is giving them some money to help them with something, and the provincial government cuts that back from the money that they would give somebody for Ontario Works or, let's say, disability, right? Then we blocked another road for people to being able to recover. So it does seem to me, and I do want to get on to food and other things about circles, but it does seem to me that some of our major problems that we are really facing is that average citizens don't understand what all the complexities are, but they want to help. Yeah. People who are being elected, or even people making policies in their bureaucracy, sometimes don't understand that the moment that you come along and decide to change something, you've taken thousands of people and just cut them off from hope. Yeah. And it's not a building kind of mentality. It's this cutting a pie into these different pieces. It's awful. And I don't know how you do it. Like, people come to a food bank, and it's great, and the public is great to the food bank. We've had our best year ever, and it's all wonderful. It's all great, but we're just giving out food. To try to do what you're trying to do, all these different things are malleable. They're changing all the time. It's hard to develop a consistency. But I presume for circles, because you are that complex and because you're that dedicated, and I know there's other groups in the city that do it as well. What can an average public person do to help with that? I know you talked about driving, somebody to the grocery store or whatever it is, but when it comes to these kind of ideological ways that some in society work, what could we do as citizens? I presume you might say vote in a certain way or whatever it is, but I think in this stuff all the time. What would your recommendation be to me as an average citizen? I listened to Jessica Justrabo today. I'm really impressed. I love the way you attack the complexity of the thing. What can I do to help?
I think there's a couple different ways. And if you can do all of the ways, then we are even happier. But I think, yes, just like you said, voting is one way that an average citizen can absolutely get involved. But not only voting in provincial or federal, but in our municipal elections as well. Get to know your city councillor, get to know your MPP, because they go and they take our stories. They take, what's going on in our municipality and bring it up. Where policy is developed. I think also just listening to one another's stories as well. Stories like Glen brings here to this awesome TV program. And I think it's getting the word out really about the realities that people are experiencing. But if you really want to make that change as a citizen here in London, Ontario, I would say volunteer and support people. I mean, many different places you can volunteer, but I think really getting involved and knowing and acknowledging those individuals who are struggling and also having our collective voice for change will make a difference. Absolutely. So like we mentioned before, United Way has this campaign to petition the government to double social assistance. And it's you can sign that petition and you can join them because I believe until February 29th, I think it is, they're going to take that to the provincial government. So that's one way to have your voice heard and to change systems. Also get on boards. Actively be on boards of social agencies. You can donate. Absolutely. Like Glen said, a lot of our funding has been cut or has been changed. A lot of our systems are changing. So funds absolutely help. But I know that everything has increased. So not everybody has those funds. But also just being kinder to one another. I know that that's just like a simple thing. And maybe it's just like a flighty, idealistic thing. But I think as we are far removed from our neighbors recently, I think from COVID, that did put a little bit of, an us versus them in our society, especially in our culture. I think just getting to know your neighbors, you looking at individuals when you're walking into the grocery store, when people are asking for money. I think it just goes a long way to really building a culture of bringing people in instead of, I don't see it. I know I'm struggling. Well, I can't give to them and I don't know what the solutions are. But I think it's really including individuals. And the one thing that we say when people come into the program is that it's a lot to do with the systems, because when people come into circles, they think that it's their personal failing. They're not good enough. People don't care about them. But when groups come and make dinner for them, when they donate to our programs, it inspires change and it inspires hope in people. And when we come together and we say, let's change the system for you, for your kids, and for our families together, then that really makes a world of difference. And that's why I love this program so much, because we often talk about our collective voice for change. And if we get louder, then the systems change because we are doing so together. And we see this in so many different ways in 2024, when, you boycott certain places, you support certain places, that change, those changes, the important changes do get made.
Yeah, I hear you. And policies are so important, just as you're saying. And if you're an average citizen and you vote, you might have voted NDP or Conservative or Green or Liberal or whatever it is, but it's not really about the party. It's about the projects the
Mhm.
previous governments have built in partnership with their cities, right? Like communities have no chance. All they can depend on is property tax. That's all that they can do. Everything else has to come from the province or from the feds. It's terrible. So it means that change up there or a change over here at Queen's Park or in Parliament, and all of a sudden everything is disrupted, right? It's more that don't just look at the party, say, here's a project around homelessness, let's say, or apprenticeships, or public transport for people of low income, whatever it is. So when you go into an election and all the campaigning is happening and you're listening to the candidates, don't just go by, well, I've always voted this particular party or not. Sit there and say, okay, if you are elected, what happened to this thing that has been building for the last decade? How will you enhance it? What will you do? I think because we sometimes lack attention like that as citizens, and we really do care about people of low income, when that happens, it gets away from us. We're no longer keeping government or bureaucracy accountable. And they start making changes and find out that they can kind of do it without too much pushback. And often there's a bias in that, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, but always to the detriment of communities. And I think that's too bad. Let's talk a bit about food.
Mhm.
You're working with these groups and with their families. How has the access to food, and I think we know some of the basic answers, but how has that changed for them over the course of the years that you have been there?
Hmm.
Is it harder to acquire? Is it not as available?
Yes, I would say that it's harder to acquire because of the zero change in income. So
Yeah,
if you are on Ontario Works, your income hasn't changed, but all of the prices have changed.
right.
You know, milk, eggs, meat, you know, kind of the staples that we need for growing kids or for adults who, you know, need to feed their bodies in order to get to work or maintain their mental health. Everything is getting so pricey. And yeah, Ontario Works hasn't changed. We try to have a meal at every meeting just to kind of alleviate that, but also to um, have that atmosphere where families can come together and have a meal. And it's something where there's a lot of stress around food because you might feel as a parent you don't have enough money
Yeah.
or the quality of food isn't good enough. So we try to have good quality food at every meeting so the parents can, yeah, have a stress free meal where they don't have to think about how much it's going to cost. Um, but we have seen great strides in some of the systems being changed though in terms of obtaining the food, like I know the food bank partners greatly with some of the resource centers and
Yeah.
other places to make sure that people don't have to travel as far or you know spend more money to get to the place, but so that has been really great. But yeah, getting healthy food, the cost of produce, the cost of fruit is so great that people don't even think about that anymore. And we know that people, in order to not have chronic health issues, they have to have healthy food.
Yeah. It's like, how should I say it? When I look at my life, I'm not a big eater. I'm not like that, neither is Jane. But some of the most pivotal moments for ourselves with our kids or with the community. Last night we had a group of people here to talk about an initiative for Canadian young people. It did. Food was offered, food was part of it, drink was part of it. It's almost impossible to imagine it without that. And then when we go to South Sudan, our son has just returned this week from there, and you know it's a famine there. It's really tough. But what they've noticed there is that without the food, the people don't gather,
Yeah.
and that is a huge thing there because that's 8 million people in that population in a very very large country. One of the ways in which you help people move forward is by bringing them together, and one of the key ways of doing that is around a meal, or whatever. And the moment that people can't do that, that community does not come to help them as much as it used to, because there's no meal present to do that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the beauty when sometimes I think I feel so burnt out, and then I head to a circles meeting, and then after it, I think, oh man, that was lovely. You just go in. So we have a couple different partnerships with Family Service Center, the White Oaks Family Center, as well as the Argyle Family Center and Inner Community Health Center. So we meet at those 3 different locations with the groups of clients as well as our volunteers and their children, and they actually have we have child programming on the premises while the adults are kind of in their program. But it is so great. Like the kids bring the parents because they're like, we want to go to circles. It's so awesome. And then they get to meet other individuals, network themselves, have a community that cheers them on, that says, you know what, this barrier is standing in your way and we're going to be able to change it together. And I think that's a big thing that restores a lot of hope in people when they come to this program, when they come in the doors. And it's just a beautiful thing when we have groups. We used to have businesses that would come in and prepare the meal for us. And it speaks so... Yeah. I just think it is such a beautiful thing for a business to say, you know what, we really believe in you. We believe in your goals. That's what it speaks to them. These people took their night to make me a meal. And I will never forget this one time. I forget what group it was, but they came and they made the best meal. They put out cutlery. They, covered the tables with linens. And then they did it like restaurant style, where they would make sure that everybody has their food at their table. And it meant the world to people. Like, it was just like going out for dinner, and they just felt so incredibly special. And for that moment, they didn't have to be reminded that they only had, $20 until the end of the month, or they had to tell their kid that they couldn't be enrolled in hockey or something like that, which is such a beautiful moment. I mean, it's a sad moment, but it's also a beautiful moment.
You need community champions, and in many ways you have them. I mean, my daughter, Christy, who's good friends with you, you guys have worked together in the past. She's always talking to me about you and about circles and what they're doing. That's part of the reason why we met a few weeks ago and worked things through. But Trevor Fowler, who is head of special events for the city and things like that, his heart is in these areas. And he and I had dinner a few weeks ago, and man, he was right on this. We need to do this. We need to do that. And then Jane Walker, I'm sure you probably know Jane, but she goes to church with me. She sits in the seats in front of Jane and I, and she'll turn right around, and she's just right there. These are the things that we need to do. And so these people aren't just going to the political things or writing their MP. They're in all these cracks between institutions and other things in the city, and fighting it and championing it for Circles, because Circles is fighting and trying to champion the people that it's trying to assist. Yeah. I think that is a small army that I personally have been challenged by. It's true, and also benefited by. I think it's wonderful that you have them on your side, and I know that you know it. But I just wish sometimes you could be out there and see it. I'd love it if you saw, like Jane Walker was here last night as part of the group. It would be so encouraging for you to see how she tackles us, right? It's good. And I know you know it. And you see it all the time, but you've got a bunch of ambassadors there that are more than ambassadors. I'm not quite sure what they are, but they are enablers, and they really do push people to get involved. That must be comforting to you.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the fact that I'm a part of this community, and we do say it's funny because I struggle to say this publicly, but a lot of people will say that Circles is like their family or like their second family, because I mean, that doesn't translate very well to like the quantitative stats that people want to hear or the funders want to hear, but it really and truly is. I mean, we have built such a beautiful community. Whether that is the clients themselves, our volunteers. Trevor Johnson has, he used to work with us very closely with Ontario Works. And yeah, I mean, we've had so many different arms and legs in this beautiful community that it really feeds, it really gives me fuel to keep going, and fuel to my staff, and also fuel to all of the clients to keep moving. And so it's a very hopeful initiative. Sometimes we're a little too hopeful and we're a little too much of cheerleaders, but I think we need that. And just like you said, I mean, ways to get involved is to support and get behind initiatives like this that are in the trenches, just doing the work and being there to be their cheerleaders, because we absolutely need that. We need everyone to get on board for these complex issues, because we are all struggling. And I think there is one word that I have always brought with me through all of my work and through my life, and it's Ubuntu. I think it's a South African, I believe, proverb, but it is, I am who I am because of who you are. And it's very focused on, it's something I learned in my community development class many, many years ago, but it has always been a principle that we really focus on in circles and myself in my own work and different places and spaces I live. I live in Old East Village, really like to get involved there as well. But I just think that we are who we are based on our community. And if we can be good neighbors, good citizens, good stewards of our tax dollars in some ways, however that looks like, and also challenge governments, I think it's really important to get involved in these issues because they affect us every single day and affect our neighbors, which is very important.
That's well said, Jessica. I think Jane and I just found out this week we were putting a bunch of figures together, but in 2023 we got $11 million worth of food donated. Wow. It's the most ever. And when you think of the times that this community is going through, it's tough. Mm-hmm. But the reason why the community gave so much was not because things are peachy. It's because things are hard. They have kids that are now living back with them. Our 3 kids are now back with us because they couldn't afford rent, even though 2 of them are working, right? So it's difficult, but I think we've talked about it, Jane and I. We as a food bank understand how generous this community is. Mm-hmm. But we have a responsibility to take that dividend that the community has given to us and share it in ways which the community believes we are doing responsibly. So we're not throwing good food after bad or good money after bad or whatever it is. We help 35 different agencies, right? We're now taking on 17 more. So as that kind of thing happens, we want the public to understand that, we know we are not the solution, but we do know that we can be enablers for those people who are working on solutions as a food bank. And I'll just say it here, and it'll probably get me in trouble, but the cutting that had been done to circles was wrong. That is just my feeling about it, because we don't know how anybody that comes to the food bank can get through all of this without that community coming together and making it happen. So it's like when every person just gets a piece of a jigsaw puzzle and say, well, good luck. It doesn't work. They need they need others coming together with their pieces of the puzzle and to make it work. So we are so totally with you on that as a food bank. We, as I said to you a few weeks ago, you empower us, because we don't want to just give out food. We want it so that people don't need to come anymore.
Absolutely.
Right? And you give us that opportunity, and we have a responsibility, not just as a food bank and not just as a public, but as a food bank, to declare to the public that this is how we're investing some of your funds, because we believe people need to get out of poverty.